Crime and violence expert from Stellenbosch University, Dr. Guy Lamb, is online to talk to us about a social media influencer who is in court for allegedly inciting a public violence. And the person we're talking about is Sphithiphithi, and the issue obviously is really dire, I should imagine, especially since we've just or trying to recover from the violence in KZN and Gauteng this last month. Dr. Guy Lamb, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you so much. And good morning to our listeners.
Quite shocking, isn't it? Because here we are thinking that it's all behind us, that the nation is beginning to do nation building, understand each other, trying to close that divide between the haves and the have-nots. We've seen major organizations, big and small, coming to the fore, trying to lend all forms of support to get people back on their feet. And then you get something like this kind of flaring up and shocking. And Sphithiphithi is not the only person apparently that has been charged. We understand that another person has also been arrested, and he is or has already appeared in court. He's a 35-year-old man, arrested in the latest leg of this investigation into the unrest. He's either appeared or will be appearing in the Pietermaritzburg Magistrates Court. What do you know about all of this, and how do you read the story?
I mean, we really have to go back to the events of a month and a half ago. So what happened in large parts of KwaZulu-Natal and what happened in specific parts of Gauteng, especially in Johannesburg, but it wasn't only just Johannesburg. But I mean, most of the concentration, as we know, was KwaZulu-Natal. And I mean, what's been happening over the past month and a half is obviously the authorities, the National Prosecuting Authority and the South African Police Service have been trying to pull together viable cases. So they've been investigating a variety of individuals with a view to trying to hold those who were behind the violence to account. So of course, we have different role players in that violence that happened. You had those right at the coalface of the violence who were perpetrating the looting, who were involved in violence against other individuals, who engaged in burning of shopping malls, so those types of individuals. Then you had those who organized that, who kind of facilitated it on the ground. Either they were actively encouraging individuals in person to do that, or they were involved in arranging groups of people to march on shopping malls or target specific targets. Then you had those individuals who were kind of inciting and instigating the violence and encouraging the violence on social media. They weren't necessarily involved in acts of violence themselves, but they were there sharing it on, encouraging people to do it. And then, of course, you had the top leadership, those who were, kind of planning much of this violence, who were kind of had certain foot soldiers on the ground who were encouraging it. So catching other elements in this is quite difficult. You need quite strong evidence. But those on social media who kind of put out messages on social media where we have evidence about it, we have photographs, we have Twitter feeds, we have Twitter messages, we have other forms of platforms that are being used, that we have evidence that links those certain individuals to encouraging that kind of violence. So this is the sort of low-hanging fruit of the investigations where, the state needs to make decisions. And here you've got this very clear evidence that's sitting on the internet that you can start targeting these individuals. But okay. I mean, the problem we have here is that they weren't necessarily behind the violence. Most of them essentially were the kind of cheerleaders of it.
So they were really inciting the violence and the looting and just trying to rile up as many young people or as many people as they possibly could. And even though they were not in the forefront, the incitement does, it does kind of, you have this groundswell, and before you know it, you have all sort of rioting happening all around the country.
Absolutely.
And there seems to be a lot of compelling evidence, as you've indicated, from all their social media messages, WhatsApp, etc., etc., etc. We also know that at least 337 people have died. That is murder, outright murder. Well, we do know that some of them died in vigilante killings, others were trampled to death, some were torched, and others were shot. However all of that unfolds, all of these people, all the role players, however minute or however great a role you played in the incitement, in the looting, in the insurrection, they are all going to be held accountable, aren't they?
Well, we hope that they get held accountable. I mean, the problem here is about holding people to account is if you're going to use the criminal justice system, one requires evidence to do that. So in the case of these sort of social media personalities, these social media accounts, there is evidence of incitement that's there. I mean, if one wanted to take it further, if they were careless and, were actually at the scenes of this violence and kind of demonstrating their engagement in looting or violence, then there's evidence to take further action against them. So we did have, for example, looters who were, celebrating their looting and taking videos of themselves looting, just, creating that evidence that the state can pursue them on those matters. So that kind of evidence exists. The inciting is the one thing. But when it comes to the actual violence and the murders that took place, it's ultimately about evidence. So the state can only bring a murder case to court or a serious assault or attempted murder case to court if they've got sufficient evidence to do that. The National Prosecuting Authority are unlikely to do it unless the case is solid. So you're either going to need evidence that, a witness evidence, or the police would have to have caught the individual with the weapon. The individual would have had to have admitted to the crime, and then you can get a fairly successful prosecution there. But in much of this violence that took place, there was quite a chaotic situation. Often the violence took place in the context of looting, where individuals got killed as a result of being shot or as a result of kind of being hurt and, kind of goods falling on them or being crushed in the kind of stampede that happened. I mean, we've seen in terms of murders, there was quite a lot of concentration within the Phoenix area around the group of vigilante groups that had kind of engaged in violence in the name of protecting their communities. And there's court cases ongoing around that. So individuals who did allegedly perpetrated murder, there will be processes and there will be hearings in relation to that. So some people will be held to account, but many won't, unfortunately. That's the problem. In South Africa, less than 10% of murder cases actually end up in court. So if we kind of want to look at that in the historical issue in the context of looting, as we're not, probably a lot of people are not going to see who perpetrated violence, or unlikely to see the inside of a courtroom, or certainly not the inside of a jail cell.
That's very disheartening and frightening, because what sort of message does this send out? I mean, it's clear that there are still these elements, and they probably will continue with this incitement. For example, Sphithiphithi, who is a social media influencer, I think she goes under the name at African Soil's personal identifier on Twitter. And the account had 67,500 followers by Sunday night. And that is truly cause for concern, because if just one person is able to have such a big following on one or two issues of suggestion or incitement, one wonders what the future holds. If they are not going to stand down, if they're not going to be held to account.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to hold those who incite violence, who engage in hate speech. Of course, this is nothing new. We've seen the use of social media. We've seen the use of SMSs, WhatsApps, of encouraging violence against those regarded as others, particularly foreign nationals. We've seen that in South Africa quite significantly. So, I mean, this is certainly nothing new what we've seen with the recent riots. I think the kind of question here is very much from a, sort of South African, peace-loving South Africans, is to challenge the kind of narratives that are out there and call people out and kind of bring in different messaging to say, we need reconciliation. We don't need this kind of messaging. And really to kind of, the woke culture really needs to come to the party on this. It really needs to kind of hold these kind of individuals to account and call them out and challenge them. Because if we don't do that, then they're certainly going to continue to build momentum. And we've seen these kind of individuals playing key roles within the United States. For example, certainly during the last days of the Trump presidency, we saw this kind of individuals playing important roles on social media, encouraging violence, particularly the attack on the Capitol building. So I think, it's important that the National Prosecuting Authority is taking action against the individual in question and against others to try and discourage this sort of behavior in the future. But I think also as kind of South Africans who make use of social media platforms and want to see a better country and a more peaceful country, one has to call these individuals out and challenge the information that they're raising and report them to the platforms that they use to prevent them from doing these kind of things.
Dr. Guy Lamb, thank you indeed for being with us. Crime and violence expert based at Stellenbosch University. It's exactly 9:06.
To her 2 young children, one of whom she is currently breastfeeding. The 36-year-old woman identified as Zama